What is up, Worcester Book Clubbers? How's it going? How's everyone doing today? No, I'm not talking to the people online at all. I'm just. This is a very weird. Yeah, this is a very weird experimental thing that we're trying to do with a hybrid Twitch and in-person book club. But we have such a nice crew out tonight that I'm only concerned about the in-person book club here. And people on Twitch can tune in for the show, but I'm pretty much unbothered by it. Before we start, I just want to say that this book club is a product of the Worcester Community Media Foundation, which we are trying to start out of Rewind Video Store over here. And any support of the foundation would be great. We have bookmarks up here for the book club that I had printed specially. They're really nice. Really nice. Ooh. Ooh. And anything that you can put in the donation bucket would be great. But okay, that part of the program over. I'll stop begging for money now. I love how this idea for this book club came about sort of just completely organically out of the Twitch stream. Like someone was just like, we got to do a book club. And then here we are 3 months later doing a book club. The book we're reading, 8 Hours for What We Will, is easily the best book about Worcester ever written. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. But I want to sort of go through the intro in chapter 1, like piece by piece. But before that, I just kind of like to gauge where you guys are at. If anybody has a particularly interesting or standout takeaway from the book or from the chapter that they want to share. And if not, that's okay.
I kind of do.
Yeah, sure.
A little bit particularly stung by the notion of Worcester that far back being the city just doesn't get it.
Yeah, exactly. No. Yeah, definitely. That was my main takeaway reading it the first time and then reading it more deeply again for this is like, this is the exact same city that it was in 1870. Welcome.
Wow.
Oh, look at that. We got a folding table. Thanks for coming. So we were just talking about some just general first like gut reactions to the reading, and definitely the sense that Worcester was basically the same city back then that it was now in terms of how the power elite relate to working people and how working people are sort of siloed into little disparate, often ethnic enclaves that don't really want to associate even with the wider city. And I thought that was really there's like some sort of like it's in the DNA of the city that's just like that. And it's just the same today as it was then. And I thought that was really great. Anybody else?
The whole time I read the chapter, I found myself going, wow, I'm so glad it's not like that now. And then going, oh, well, crap. Now it's exactly like that now.
Yeah.
Just a roller coaster.
Even just the anecdote, like this was written in the 1980s, and somewhere, I don't know if it was in the beginning under acknowledgments, like how like Bill Wallace was like working at the historical, and like he's still there. It's
oh yeah, right.
That was like 40 years ago.
Yeah, that I saw that. I didn't catch that the first time I read it, but I was like, oh damn. Yeah. Special thanks to Bill Wallace. Yeah. So I prepared. Hello. Welcome to the goddamn book club.
The spot too.
Yeah, wherever you can find room. It's this is a great turnout. I was wondering if I would just be talking to the computer screen by myself, but I'm really happy that so many people showed up. That's really great.
You're gonna have to knock down this wall for the next one.
Yeah, I know, right? I know. So I prepared a couple little bits of notes for context for this book. So yeah, it was published in 1983. And it was the product of 3 years of research. He lived here for 3 years. It was his dissertation initially. 30 oral histories, archival research, newspapers, government documents. And it's a study of how, workers in Worcester spent their time, formed their communities, and interacted with the power elite. Roy Rosenzweig was not a Worcester guy. He's a New York guy, a historian. He's a doctor of philosophy from Harvard, Guggenheim Fellow, and interestingly enough, late in his career, he was a big digital archivist and historian, which is ironic because there's no digital version of this book anywhere. I had to the scan that I have pulled up and the scan on the computer and everything is the scan that I had to make myself with my cell phone. It's kind of bewildering, but what are you going to do? So yeah, the book is 8 chapters long, but we're focusing on the introduction, which was very short, and the first chapter, which is sort of a rundown of the socioeconomic and political environment at the time. And boy, is it exactly the same socioeconomic and political environment as it is now. I think that, so I have a confession to make. First off, I have never been to a book club, nor have I run one. So show of hands, who is with me in having never been to a book club? Oh, that's great. I feel so much better now. I feel so much better. I'm going to do this the way that I think it should be done, but oh yeah, the bookmarks are a great start. Yes, that is right. Throw any amount of money that you want into the can and take a Worcester Community Media Foundation, Worcester's local 69 book club. Please, this is a product of the Worcester Community Media Foundation, and we want it to exist and be able to fund work in the future. So, anything you give is nice. But yeah, let's get into the introduction, shall we? That's page, what is the page number? Whatever it is. The first page with words on it.
Page 1.
No, page 1, not chapter 1 yet. We're doing the introduction. And let me pull up my notes here. So the book works on 3 central questions: working class beliefs, values, and traditions, interclass bonds and struggles, which I found very interesting, and change from the 19th to the 20th century, which isn't really relevant to this chapter, but we'll get to that later. Later in the book, there's whole chapters dedicated to saloons or bars, 4th of July, state fairs, and then movie theaters. The movie theater part is really interesting. That's sort of how the working class got ushered into the 20th century. But given that this is what I do for a living, I am interested to hear how people thought about his approach to using Worcester as a way to contribute to a general theory of change. He said a community study offers the best chance of capturing workers in all their complexity, not because like Worcester, what happens in Worcester is exactly what happens everywhere else, but if you try to focus on like the entire country, you lose the peculiarities, is the word he used, that you can find in a peculiar place like Worcester. So I don't know. I'm just tossing that out there. If anybody has any sort of thoughts on like what makes Worcester an interesting place to do this sort of work where you're trying to look at broader themes, but within this tiny petri dish or microcosm.
I think he makes a really good point for using it as a case study when he lays out that despite all of the kind of the shots against it, like it doesn't have navigable waterways, it doesn't have a super strong labor force in like a union sense, but it still has everything from corsets to millwork to machinists.
Right.
It's all there.
Yeah, it was like the line that opens that section is like, Worcester is an unlikely industrial city. Like it kind of cropped up out of nowhere once the Blackstone Canal went in. And that, I don't know if this is too much of a tangent, but that like made Worcester's like sort of power elite or ruling class also was sort of relatively new because the city grew so quickly from nothing, just being in the middle of the woods during that period. And I don't know, I wrote a whole long essay last night about how the current mediocrity can be traced to the original power elite, which never really considered themselves as the people who wanted to build like a grand city or have like a grand vision for what Worcester could be as an urban center or metropolis. They were just as insular and self-interested as the working people. But that's way further down in the book. So I just want to toss that general question out there again. What makes Worcester sort of an interesting way to look at society in general? You know, like what are some of the peculiarities that you saw in reading this, or in the way you're thinking about it, that that stood out to you?
I mean, I thought it was a really interesting sort of case study in how, I mean, like a lot of American capitalists come from like new money. And it was very interesting seeing Worcester as an example of how like a very tight-knit, organized, ruling capitalist class like effectively creates a city where it really doesn't make sense to actually have a city.
Right.
Like there are no major waterways, and like there is no dedicated industry. It seemed like they were kind of shifting from, kind of product to product. And the fact that same with the working class of the city. Part of the reason it seemed like the ruling class could be so successful is because all of their laborers were from constantly shifting immigrant classes who could never really form a cohesive consciousness.
Right. Yeah.
It's pretty clear they knew what they were doing and really successful at it. I mean, this is it seems like this is going to be a really interesting story about failure.
Yeah.
As a self-described socialist, I love stories about failure.
Right.
Basically all, late history.
Yeah. This is that's definitely one of the themes from chapter 1 is that Worcester, it just sucks as a Worcester.
Well, we love it.
Yeah, Worcester sucks at organizing. It sucks at organizing to this day, and it sucked at organizing back then. Like the parts where like union leaders were just like shaking their head and they're like, I don't know what to do with these Hill people. Like they will not collectively organize at all. And I thought that was interesting to consider next to the fact that it wasn't like a company town for one company. It was like a lot of different smaller companies that, were controlled by the same sort of like little enclave or ruling class, but they weren't like the same workplace for the, the small insular immigrant groups that were churning over at a high rate. And it's like, it's interesting to consider, like, especially with that Emma Goldman passage about how she like kind of missed the working class or any sort of like labor activity in Worcester. And like maybe that's the reason why there's never been, you know, a strong left or any solidarity in Worcester, is because there was no like one shop to organize people around an identity that's bigger than their ethnic identity. There wasn't like a Ford production plant here or anything. It was just all these small little, relatively little companies. Yeah. And I don't know, I just think that's interesting.
And even after they all like Lyman and Gordon became Lyman and Gordon, it was still like that.
Right.
There was one part of the chapter where it was like you could literally draw a map of like where the Armenians chose to settle and where the Irish were, and they just never crossed. So they all had the same damn thing in common, but they couldn't speak to each other.
Right. Yeah. And they were like content to just keep that spatial separation and didn't really concern themselves at all with anything that could have comprised a wider socialist movement. And I don't know, you kind of see that in how hard the progressive push this past city election failed. You know, it all crashed and burned against literally just Maureen Binenda having that name, right? You know, so it's like, I don't know. One of the big questions I was left with is like, how do you change that? How do you get around that? You know, and I don't know if there's any easy answers for that, but if anybody has an idea,
Please run for city council.
yeah, right. What's that?
I feel like to be a good labor organizer, I can't talk, but you have to know a lot of languages.
Right.
I mean, I look at myself all the time. It's like, because I have all these ideas. Like, these are the things that need to happen for the city to change. It's like, I don't speak English.
Yeah, that's true.
To help anything.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, like even for my newsletter, I've like thought about trying to get it translated, and it's just like, I don't know. I just can't figure out how to do that.
You gotta get more tips and tip jar.
Yeah, right. More tips and tip jar. We can hire a translator. You know, yeah. Yeah, this line in the intro from page 2, the failures of the socialist movement cannot be understood by merely studying the internal workings of the Socialist Party, nor can the weaknesses of unionism among steelworkers before 1930s be explained simply by reference to the institutional history of blah, 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 blah. You have to look at their cultural backgrounds and social relations, as well as their institutional memberships and economic and political behavior. That's sort of where Rosenzweig brings himself into describing why he chose Worcester, right? That has to do a lot with the fact that there was no like sort of political solidarity here, but a lot of observations to be had about the cultural backgrounds and social relationships, and how absent any sort of like sense of self as a class, all of the immigrant enclaves in Worcester kind of retreated into their own interior worlds and sought to like sort of protect that from the city, as opposed to like being a political force in the city that would make the city better for them. And I think that's just fascinating and sort of like defines like a mentality in Worcester of just being like completely unfriendly, and like you don't like it's weird to like compare like 1870s labor organizing or the lack thereof to the fact that like you don't say hi to your neighbor really depending on the neighborhood you live in, but it really does feel like there's an unfriendliness and an insularness to Worcester that exists to this day. I don't know if anybody had any similar thoughts reading this, but I don't know. I feel like yeah.
So on page 11, talking about Goldman's rejection of Jewish religious and moral traditions concerned Worcester Jews more than her attacks on capitalism and the state, because it was the cultural values and institutions of the ethnic community that provided the moral and social principles around which they organized their lives, which is like so much like a perfect summary of what I got from like the introduction, chapter 1, and even a little bit of chapter 2.
Yeah.
That you can come in knocking on the door and building the ice cream shop, but if you don't show up with the bread, milk, and eggs that your neighbor needs, maybe in the way that they need it, you're not going to be received in the same way.
Yeah.
Or in the way
Right.
that they want.
Yeah. Yeah. And like from Emma Goldman's perspective, like how could she have not felt at odds like with that community that just thought of her as like an aberration or like a freak or something, you know? It's like yeah, it's like in, I don't know, I feel like ethnic communities being insular and focused on religion and sort of like the traditions of their culture, like it kind of produces like a, I don't know, like a conservatism in a way. And like,
in the 1870s.
yeah, especially in the 1870s. That's right. Yeah, so like that that chapter there goes on like in Worcester, most workers fastened on to the cultural world of their ethnic communities. Within these self-enclosed immigrant settlements, Worcester's workers both resisted and accommodated themselves to the rule of the city's industrial elite, the men called Yankees. Workers used the physical and psychological space afforded by their ethnic communities to carry out their lives as they chose. But to understand the importance of those ethnic communities, as well as set the stage for a more detailed analysis of working class recreation, it's just transitioning to the next thing. But yeah, so that's what I was getting at is like, instead of forming any sort of solidarity, it was that, you know, using physical and psychological space afforded by these sort of like spatially disparate and separate ethnic communities, they kind of accommodated themselves, as Rosenzweig put it, to the rule of the city's industrial elite. And I think that's really interesting, getting into the next section on industry and industrialists, that like the industrial barons of this time like were very well aware of that and like exploited it. And I'm wondering if anybody has any observations on like that sort of like I don't know, condescension and exploitation of ethnic lines that's in this section in particular, on industry and industrialists.
And what it makes me think is, you know, you started off the question of like, you know, why does he make the case to like look at Worcester to make a larger analysis on the working class? And you know, he compares just in this first section like how Worcester isn't really like other industrial cities and on. But to me, I see that Worcester really does represent kind of what we see today at large. Like, you know, we don't have organized labor. We had a very brief few decades in the middle of the 1900s where we had organized labor and it didn't last long. And we continue to be, throughout our whole entire country, broken down along ethnic lines or in smaller enclaves, and we can't seem to find solidarity around issues that most of us would benefit from. Whereas if you look at maybe some European countries that have gotten progressive policies and things in place, they're able to do that and we're not. So for me, I was like, yeah, I guess Worcester really can be representative of what we see as a whole in the country, like even today, like we're still struggling with these same issues. And when you think of like, you know, the elite in the city at the time organizing and like, yeah, that happens with capital here and it's still happening today, like the big takeover of everything. It's just easier for capital to do that. They've got the money and the resources and the time, whereas workers don't. So,
Right. Yeah. I mean, like you can extrapolate like this line here from page 12, first full paragraph. Factory owners remained native-born, locally rooted, unified, and paternalistic. Factory workers remained ethnic and divided. And I think that you can kind of extrapolate that dynamic like all the way out to national politics. It's like the people with the hands on the levers of real power understand and are like sort of invested in maintaining divisions, creating divisions artificially. And that's where my people come in, the journalists. Yeah, we do a really good job of that for them overall. But anyway, that's not germane to the subject matter.
It does go back to communication or lack of that. Like a child of divorced parents. If they're not talking, you can play them both, and then that child can benefit from both those parents, right? That's why when political sides don't talk, then someone at the top is benefiting.
Right. And like the task at hand is taking a bunch of children who aren't even friends, don't particularly like each other, and just like have to be vaguely around them, and being like, hey guys, we should all work together, you know? We should all attack the parents at once with a unified message and a unified, structure of in hierarchy. It's like, I don't know, it'd be very hard to convince a group of like 8 kids to do that. And I think that that's what the labor organizers quoted in this chapter where we're talking about. It's just like very, very frustrated by Worcester. I mean, there was that line, I can't remember where it is in the chapter, but one of the union organizers called Worcester one of the scab holes of the state. That's page 20. Yeah, one of the scab holes of the state. Yeah, and I don't know. I'm gonna scroll over to page 20 there and focus on that for a little bit, because that was just like, man, yep.
What is so interesting to me is that Worcester is now one of the strongest union towns and one of the strongest union states. I am a union carpenter. I live and work in Worcester. I've built 2 of our schools now, and we are currently within like 6 different building and blue collar locals.
Right.
So there is a fascinating like shift in like the social and cultural and like economic landscape between like when this was written and when this was written about to now and like 30 years ago or so. Because for like where we're situated in the country and especially like in the state, the amount of like union building trade workers in this area is wild.
Yeah.
Like, what changed?
Right.
Scaffold?
Yeah.
I'm gonna send that to my DNA.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Like the St. Vincent nurses strike was like national news. It was like a legitimately impressive victory of national.
Share than New York City.
A better what?
A better market share than New York City.
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
I've never been in a union until I moved to Worcester.
Same.
Me too.
That is so awesome.
Yeah.
It's also sick.
It's something like, I mean, I don't know if the current trend is, I mean, maybe it's partially reflected by the national environment. I mean, you don't have to read a lot of news to know that labor action is on the rise. I mean, still on the ropes in a way.
Rising.
They got the breath back for a second. Let's see if it lasts. It's MCCC for the Massachusetts Community College. What about TA?
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Oh, okay. And over there, what union are you in?
MSCA, Massachusetts State College.
What is you?
I work at Worcester State, so.
Because, I mean, you're asking like what's changed. Another thing I was thinking was also looking at the upper classes in Worcester and how you mentioned one of the quotes how one of the traits sort of back in the day was a paternalism, and that was part of how they would discourage people from joining the unions. It was like, hey, if you don't vote this way, we'll buy you a Christmas goose. or something for the holidays.
Right.
Yeah, manufacturers manipulated not only the carrot of paternalism, but also the stick of repression to prevent unionization and strikes.
Right.
The carrot of that visualization.
Yeah.
Was like,
Yeah.
yeah. Also,
Come on, I'm a good boss. I take care of you guys. Come on, what are you doing? What are you doing?
Worcester's landmarks. These weird, like,
Probably have to memorialize every single corner of the city.
oh yeah, like some poor Polish boy who died on like a
There's one right out there.
or something.
Yeah.
yeah.
Like the poor boy and all the weird little statues of like nude kids all over this. I don't get it. I never really it's okay.
I should have actually hold the hands.
Yeah. Well, that's what that was, and it's something, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's kind of, the ruling class tradition back in the day was like, yeah, we're, not paying you anything, you don't have to work on the yard. Those nice things. And I'm thinking,
Oh, so you're getting
they don't do that.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
Billionaires used to bring it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's like at the,
We're paying for
We're
that.
paying
We're paying for that.
and maybe that's what's changed. It's,
Yeah, I took that note, that it's private capital dominated to an unusual degree, but but then in current times, I feel like there's a push to have like the state pay and get donors and grants and even just like taxpayers. So I think that's the shift.
Yeah, but I mean, so you consider that like Worcester has an exceptionally strong union presence now, and like notable recent union victories, especially with the St. Vincent nurses strike, but like still a city government and a city council that is entirely hostile to any sort of thing that a union would support, and that's bringing me to my second favorite quote of this book from page 15, where it's talking about how like all of the executives went to the local Polytechnic Institute as well as the boys' trade school, and that sort of like collective shared grooming of their boys, if you will, tends to make the city one in which a feeling of solidarity as opposed to labor may be and is easily fostered. And that solidarity as opposed to labor, I think, is one of the standout sort of lines that transcends to this day. Because like when you look at the city council, they just take a reflexively hostile stance to people that aren't like of their little inner circle or whatever you call it.
The quotation on page 19 that struck me the most, I think, was the labor news repeatedly and bitterly complained the city officials were corporation owned and monopoly bound, subservient to the big business machine, and extremely antagonistic and positively indifferent to workers. Like when you started off, city councils, they're still the same.
Right.
And I just like thinking about like Spectrum and monopoly bound and things.
Right. Yeah, like everyone in the city hating Spectrum so much, but Eric Batista just like taking municipal broadband off the table for absolutely no reason.
Yeah.
And he didn't have to give one.
Yeah.
And he doesn't even like, no one ever looks at the fact that there are lobbyists that like are probably hooking him up with something, it's like.
Like, does he have secret better internet at home?
Oh yeah.
I have 5.
Right. Yeah, like we're all operating on the guest account and he has the staff account. Yeah. It's possible. He's just torrenting like it's just every single movie in there and no one's giving him any.
They're not flagging it.
Yeah, no one's flagging it. And you're like, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't want to talk about that.
One quote that stood out for me, like on page 19, the bottom paragraph, and it says, unlike Boston, where the Democratic political machine aggressively pursued the interests of Irish working class constituents, neither of Worcester's two mainstream political parties consistently championed working class candidates or causes. I could say that's still the same case today.
Right.
It's part of reading this. I had to keep reminding myself, like, there was no internet. Like the way they knew about things, like especially the political party thing, and they kept comparing Worcester to Lynn in this chapter.
Right.
Lynn was, 82%, textile workers or something, and the comparison is like nowadays you can reach people in Lynn in 3 seconds, and in this age it was like, well, you got your news from the newspaper and your neighbor,
Right.
so that's what you knew, and what you could support or not support, or what you knew about the political parties.
Right. And like people, especially, new immigrants in Worcester at this time, like didn't like, can you imagine like what your sense of your world would be? Like just getting outside of the city limits was like a prohibitively difficult task. And that's going to come up in later chapters about like public parks and stuff like that. But yeah, it's like the insularity of the world back then is kind of hard to wrap your head around. And I also think that like the Republican and the Democratic parties, like not really presenting themselves as an alternative avenue for working class political mobilization. Like we have a city council right now, which like you're considered rude if you bring up the idea that they're either a Democrat or a Republican. When it comes to their decision making, it's like, oh no, this is not nonpartisan. This is a nonpartisan board, and you're right. Of course it's not, but like, what a better Trojan horse for just like operating out of like a shared class interest than just being like, this isn't about party politics. No. This is totally neutral. It's like, what's left? It's just like juicing your own property value. Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like anytime your two political parties agree on something that's actually fine, you should be concerned.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That's when the property value is getting real juiced. So from that solidarity, where I want to find it because there was a description of the West Side back then. It's in like the page 12 to 15 range. Like how the ruling elite like lived essentially. Where is it? Oh yeah. Supporting and reinforcing these business connections, as well as a network of interlocking corporate and bank directorates, were extensive social and cultural ties. Worcester industrialists worshipped at the same Protestant churches, belonged to the same clubs, attended the same schools, lived in the same West Side neighborhoods, vacationed at the same resorts, and married into each other's families. Like, sheesh, that is absolutely the case today. When you look at someone like Joe Petty or Tim Murray or Mike Angelini, it's like those are just all guys that go way back. And Ed Augustus is one of those guys. Eric Batista worked his way up to being one of those guys. And it's like, when you look at the way that the city manager gets hired in Worcester, like Joe Petty just said he's hired basically. And then there was like no process at all outside of that. And it's just like him and Tim Murray like go and get beers. Like Eric Batista sold Ed Augustus his condo, at like a deal. It's like they are all like the extensive social and cultural ties is really interesting. And when you consider that the people in power have extensive social and cultural ties, and then the people that they're presiding over and making decisions that affect are like disparate disconnected and have no sense of class solidarity, like, man, that is like a wet dream for like a union busting like factory back then. And of course, like they had no incentive to like do it different, and in that light, yes, this is what I was in that light. I found it particularly ghoulish and just indicative of the hostility to working people in the city. This passage on the bottom of page 15 about the National Metal Trades Association, which was basically used as a cudgel to blacklist union organizers. Yeah, so it was like I don't know what the modern analog to the National Metal Trades Association would be. Maybe like the Business Development Corporation or something like that. But the NMTA has for years held sway over principally everything that spells business and finance in Worcester. The NMTA's blacklist and propaganda supplemented a more subtle paternalistic labor and civic policy on the part of its leading members. Worcester industrialists did not rule as unenlightened despots. They worked hard to persuade the city's middle and working classes that they had the best interests of all Worcesterites at heart, while negotiating against their best interests.
Yeah. The paternalistic aspect is immediately following that. Civic generosity endowed Worcester with large numbers of churches, parks, colleges, hospitals, and monuments.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's like
providing clubhouses, outings, and Christmas turkeys.
Right. It's like
how specific? How specific is that? It's so weird.
Yeah, and you have to imagine that like worked. Like a union organizer being like, "Hey, if we all just take out union cards, we can collectively bargain for more money." And they're like, "Collectively bargain? The guy gives me a turkey every Christmas. Who could want anything more than that?"
And back then, the employers were like, "Here, this is where you live.
Right.
This is your house. Here you go."
Yeah, true.
And you would get evicted if you joined a union and they found out.
Right. That's the part that I'm trying to find right now.
I can't find it either.
They had an actual blacklist, which is like the blacklist today is if you show up to speak at city council.
Yeah, I took the note because they have that notation. Joined union, a disturber.
Yeah, what
So I
page is
was
that
like,
on?
We should 23, bottom of 23.
Yeah.
And I put that we should do joined book club, a disturber.
Join book club. I love that idea. Join book. Yeah, we gotta turn that into merch. Yeah, right here. By the early 20th century, the Employers Association had systemized the procedure through citywide blacklists. The Metal Trades Association maintained a central card file based on reports from employers and their company spies. A typical notation might read, "Joined union, a disturber." Through the system of spying and blacklisting in vogue by the Employers Association, the Labor News commented in 1915, even the thought of belonging to a union made a man in danger of losing his job. Yeah, like that's absolutely like a manifestation of that solidarity as opposed to labor among the working classes. I mean the ruling class of the city. Let's see what else. Who has another cool thought?
All the mentions of the police doing terrible things to union members.
Oh yeah.
I mean, not shocking, but hard to read.
Yeah. Is that in the past?
That's right after that. What we're reading right now.
Oh, okay.
24. So, like in 1912, Police Chief Dave Matthews made it known that he would not tolerate these disturbers.
Right. Oh yeah, he
They
banned.
must not come here and kick our dog around.
Yeah, that's our dog to kick.
That's exactly.
Exactly.
Nobody kicks my dog but me.
I love it.
Oh my God, yeah. In 1918, Worcester police arrested 4 officials of the Machinists Union for distributing copies of the Labor News to Norton Company employees. imagine like that obviously wouldn't fly today.
Doesn't one of them literally say that they've got more money than you can go up against?
Yeah.
That firm's got too much cash for labor to battle.
Right.
Yeah. You'd better let up. It's like, yeah. It's
Just being blatant about it.
yeah. Like it's not even like they're like, we couldn't think of a crime this necessarily is, but you'd better let up. Yeah.
When I read that line, I have a very visual memory, right? So I pictured today's Worcester cops like talking to someone, and I'm like, wait, no, this isn't written now, but it could be.
Right.
It's just a reminder of cops were always created to protect property of wealthy people. That's the whole goal.
And industrialists.
Yeah.
Right.
But I mean, is that really any different than the union busting that happens today? I mean, look at what Amazon does. I mean, it's pretty insidious, and they're really well connected. And you look at like what in Bessemer, Alabama, how like they were working so closely with a lot of public officials, like to change the traffic lights, to do all of these things. We just now have more like technology and like AI and surveillance to do some of the stuff that they just didn't have back then.
And even with the Starbucks dealio that's going on now, it's taken them more than 2 years to go, okay, we'll barter with 300 plus stores that have voted to unionize. I guess we'll sit down now.
Yeah.
It's taken them years.
Right. Now, instead of like deliberately sicking the cops on people who are trying to distribute like pro-labor literature, it's like it's the same sort of violence is like meted out by just like well-heeled consulting firms who like are very good at lying to people. It's like, oh, it would be gauche to send the cops in to beat up and suppress labor organizers, but we can contract McKinsey to lie to their faces and appeal to their deepest, darkest impulses.
You don't have to be a person who's recognizable handing out paper. Nowadays when you're trying to labor organize, you can be throwaway account 1, 2, 3, 4 on the internet. Speaking to throwaway account 5, 6, 7, 8 on the internet.
Right.
I mean, or they just fire you, right?
Right. Yeah.
Technically illegal, like people just get fired.
I mean, if everything's that well, then it's on on you as the fired person to prove. That
They're already doing that, probably. I mean, depending on the type of job you have, your contracts can be against that. So they just decide not to do it.
Page 24 has the absolute perfect summary of the entire 30 pages of since these nationalities do not affiliate in concerted efforts for promoting strikes, labor unions, and similar movements among the working class become impossible.
Right. Yeah, I was just getting to another thought along those lines. Down on, where was I? Page 25, the last full paragraph on that page. It's like the same idea. Yet for all this militancy, most ethnically based strikes ended in defeat. So it's like there was like a pattern of people within their sort of ethnic enclaves trying to do worker solidarity and build, like worker power, but they just didn't. There was no wider coalition than their ethnic group, and that's what made them fail. And like the industrialists would just bring in scabs from another ethnic group, and they pit them against each other and make them fight. And there was an example of that somewhere in here. I just can't remember quite where it was.
Same page 24. In October 1870, towards the bottom, when Irish workers struck at Consignment Wire Works, the company quickly filled their places with Native Americans, Germans, and French Canadians. The immediate result was a melee between strikers and scabs.
Yeah. That's exactly it. Like, yeah, they just like had that huge blind spot, just left it right open for like the ruling elite to exploit ethnic tensions. It's like colonial theory almost, yeah, and then right. Yeah, the divides are there. It's just like, oh, let's deliberately cause a situation where there's going to be street violence and like bye labor solidarity. And like Worcester made it easy because of the constantly shifting populations. Right down at the bottom of page 24, the last sentence there: in a city with constantly shifting populations, employers could readily diffuse unionizing efforts by playing off one ethnic group against another.
The Worcester magazine enumerating the advantages of Worcester as a manufacturing center prominently cited the large number of different nationalities, since these nationalities do not affiliate, and concerted efforts for promoting strikes, labor unions, and similar movements among the working class become impossible.
Right.
In the Worcester magazine.
Yeah.
So is it the same Worcester magazine?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I know. I would love to go back and find a copy of this proto Worcester magazine. Yeah. Right, and there was like that sort of like everyone wants to be the last one off the boat sort of mentality, where there was like a hierarchy among the immigrant enclaves based on how long people have been there. So it's like the Irish and the Swedes were first, and they really didn't like those Southern and Eastern Europeans. They were like they like established hierarchies in that way as well. So there was it'd be cool to go through it in a little bit of depth, where it's like towards the end there's like this one strike where Worcester got close. It didn't end up working. I was struggling to find it. Next time I make my notes, I'm going to put page numbers. So
On page 26, there's like also a specific call out to like inability to communicate leading to strike breakdown. All during the strike, notes a contemporary observer. Not one address or speech any kind was made to the Finns, French Canadians, Swedes, Armenians, and so on in their native tongue by any union organizer. This shows a defect in the organization for the men who have built the shops since the strike have been largely local workmen of those nationalities. As the staff shows the strikers, the strike was gradually broken.
Yeah, right. It's like how is a worker who like isn't being spoken to in their own language supposed to trust a union, or supposed to trust go on strike for somebody who they can't even understand? That's such a huge barrier, and we still don't do a very good job confronting that. It's hard because like I'm dumb, I can't learn another language. I don't know. I can barely speak one language, it's like, yeah. I mean, honestly, like that could be an actually useful thing that AI could do. But I don't know. I don't want to talk about AI at all.
Don't get me
yeah. We got to get back to the 1890s here. We're not talking about.
If people do want to read the Worcester magazine from 1902, it's on the Happy Trust website. I found it.
Oh, really?
Well, yeah, it's open.
Oh, that's awesome.
Happy Trust, HATHI Trust. Just Google like Worcester magazine 1902, and it's like the second or third result.
Yeah.
It's just right here.
Yeah, I know, I'm joking. It was like back in the day when that's what we used to have to do.
I mean, that's probably where it came from.
Oh, yeah.
I gotta be on set.
All right. Well, thank you for coming down.
Are we doing this next month?
Yeah, I was gonna put it out at the end of this to see what people want to do, either every 2 weeks or once a month or whatever.
Great talking to you guys.
Yeah.
Good night.
Yeah. Have a good night. See you next time. So yeah, I don't know how long do people who've done book clubs, how long do they go usually?
Usually an hour.
Yeah. I
And I'd just like to know if there's another book club in District Dawson, Thursdays at 7, so.
Oh, cool. Where is it? What's the?
What's the Silent Book Club, and they're actually, I think they're really pressed again today, because I really wanted to go again, but,
What's this?
oh, I saw it.
You just
guys
sit
there.
You just.
So it's like a reading. It's like they go 6 to 8. Yeah.
It's like it's for you to quietly read a book. with
Yeah.
people.
Never. We had to.
It sounds nice.
And we had to do deer and rough everything to read in elementary schools. Yeah. The silent reading check.
Deer.
Deer. That's cute.
Deer and dare. Use different letters.
So where is it? Page 30, getting to the end of the chapter. There is one line that I really wanted to pull out and focus on, but just give me a second to find it because I didn't note these where they are very well. Yes, here we go. So still, the ethnic basis of working class life, this is on page 30, created strains for the broader working class community. Although the ethnic groups usually lived in harmony, the harmony was built mainly on lack of contact rather than on mutual respect. And that, as I read this like a second time ahead of this meeting, that really stood out to me as like something that is definitely true to this day about Worcester, is that like it's like, you know, it's a relatively peaceful city, but I think that there's a lot of different groups of people in the city and just a general sort of policy of maintaining harmony based on lack of contact, you know. There's not really, you know, it's like, it's almost hard to say that Worcester has an identity that supersedes any of the identities formed by the sort of, you know, ethnic immigrant groups or enclaves or the power elites little enclave in and of itself. You know, like when somebody like Joe Petty talks about Worcester, he means like the West Side.
Yeah.
You know, like he gets away with it. They all get away with talking about the narrow interests of just like the maybe 10% of the people that keep them in power, and like get to say that that's the city and like lay claim to the identity of the city being like, you know, these politically connected families that have lived here forever. And this that's sort of maintained on the harmony built mainly on lack of contact, because like everyone else who lives here is like, yeah, whatever, I don't care about Worcester at all, I'm just living here. So, you know, you
Well, the faint hope that we had about the city council election recently, it was like, maybe we'll get a 6 out of 11.
right.
It's like, okay, well, part of it can be blamed on like these lines still exist and they were not fully crossed.
Right.
Between, you know, the ethnic barriers of this mentions.
Right.
So
Yeah. Because like, I mean, like to this day, like you see where people vote and where people don't are like, it's very obvious that there is only one ethnic enclave in the city that is voting, and it's
a minority
over here, right? And it's a minority, and it's like when you think about like how to compel or motivate a larger turnout than like the 20% that we're used to, and the 20% that's going to keep giving us people like Maureen Binenda and Kate Toomey, like it's such a difficult question. Why should anybody else care? Well, how could you possibly like explain that there is a different way that things could be done that could benefit you, you know? Because they've never seen City Hall do anything good to them. You know, it's just like excise
Maybe
bills.
Again, this comes back to, I think that is in general how all of our country is. We stay separated. I mean, segregation alive and well still today. And that has what has maintained the harmony, not because we have mutual respect for each other. We don't actually live in a multi-ethnic democracy. We like to sometimes say that we do, but we really don't, because we have no respect for people who are different from us.
Right.
We just try to segregate everybody and pit each other against each other. And that's so, that to me, this is how Worcester is reflective of our whole country.
Yeah. It's like for someone like Joe Petty, he has no like self-interest in more Latino voters, right? That's not something that he wants. He's not going to try to get that, you know? So they're like, the people in power right now are perfectly content with low turnout. Like they might be like, oh, it's a shame that nobody pays attention to local politics, but like, that's the way that they want it. That's what keeps them in power.
Community organizing that. Pretty cool integration of community cultures, including simultaneous language interpretation during meetings and workshops and stuff. Just using like full audio equipment. Good words.
Yeah.
One thing to keep in mind too is, just through the languages, at least something I've seen is it often builds a lot more trust with people in community, different communities. If you're speaking their language, the interpreter kind of adds another part and they kind of remain a little more of a distance when you add an interpreter, even if it's AI. So, I mean, modern day, now, maybe even just that's a trust issue. Like if you had, some people advocating for it, that's directly say, people who spoke English and Spanish.
Yeah, definitely. People from all communities.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's like, I don't know, a useful thought exercise, I guess, is like, I mean, what's it called? Quinsig Village is like rapidly emerging as like a Ghanaian neighborhood. And like, I don't personally know how to reach anybody in that community, right? Like how could you go about doing that? I think that's a way more productive question than like thinking that you can pull Joe Petty to the left. It's like it'd be more productive to focus energy on like how do you expand the group of people, the amount of people that are invested in the local political arena than thinking that Joe Petty is going to do anything that would put a West Side homeowner in a bad position or a relatively bad position. I don't know. Yeah, so I love this line a little bit further down on that page. Where are we? Page 30, last paragraph. Although Worcester immigrants had little to do with each other, their daily lives often followed the same rhythms. The common experience of low pay, long hours, and unsafe working patterned immigrant lives in the most fundamental way. The equivalence of the word immigrant and blue collar in the late 19th and early 20th century, Worcester provided the most significant bond uniting Worcester's ethnic communities. But like there was just never like.
But it wasn't a bond.
It wasn't a bond. No, it's like no one cared whether they were a blue collar worker or not. They weren't like operating from the best interest of a blue collar worker. They were operating from the best interest of their ethnic enclave. And they were getting set on each other. Like right above that on that same page, the last line of the paragraph above that In the shoe factories, French Canadian straw bosses reportedly discriminated against less skilled Italian workers. Like there's like a, it's like there's just a people feel compelled to like punch down and like jockey for a relative position among other ethnicities instead of building, bridges. So that's still true to this day.
They're like emboldened by their group status, yet not seeing the power of like collectively grouping.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
They're in like a sort of pseudo union of just their ethnic and religious and neighborhood demographics versus like we are all workers.
Yeah. Right. And the people who have it the worst these days are the lower middle class whites. They're just encouraged to be psychos all the time about everything, and that dominates most of the the issues we have recently. Like that, the reason why a bike lane on Mill Street was an issue is because working class whites are set against. I don't know, but it's a big issue here. The cranks, and it's no bueno. So yeah, the way that this chapter concludes really sets us up for like, I think an important thing to remember when reading the rest of this book is that all of these observations, like the next chapter is going to be about saloons and bars, which is awesome. And then the chapter after that is about how people celebrated the 4th of July, which was awesome. There's a lot of funny stuff in that chapter about drunk people back then. But like, I think it's a really interesting, just overall thing to keep in mind that like the socioeconomic and political context of this time forced all of these disparate, spatially disconnected, working class ethnic groups to just focus inward and do their best to like get the city and the power elite off their backs, but they didn't ever try to like contest the power elite in a serious way. And that is, I would say, still true to this day. And like sort of the context to look at like when this book starts getting into the nitty gritty of like, what saloons and bars look like and when they were illegal and when they weren't and stuff. And it's like taking that sort of broad dynamic of reality and it gets way more into the minutia after that, which I'm excited about. I don't know. Anybody else have anything to discuss?
This is a spoiler a little bit, but a lot of this book is about like who gets to decide what fun is.
Yes.
I love because like the wealthy people are like, maybe it's just staring at fields, and everyone else is like, I think it's getting wasted.
Yes, exactly.
But I think we still have this issue where people are like, I mean, my neighbor literally said this to me recently, like, I don't vote because politics is nasty and it's negative. And I just want to be a positive person, and that's very dumb. But it's also kind of, I mean, this is still the issue where, like, if you're a union organizer, you're talking about everything that sucks. And you're just telling someone, here are all the reasons that your life is going really terribly right now and how degraded you are. And it's, I don't know, this is still an obstacle to organizing. But
right.
You have to come out on the side of what's negative, and people are like, I would rather do things that are pleasant and fun. I'd rather get the Christmas turkey or whatever.
Yeah, right.
I'm excited for
Yeah.
chapters that are coming up.
Oh, I know. There's so much like there's so many examples of the way that like middle and upper classes just made their lives less fun by moralizing and defining their decorum against the fun that working class people were having. And they just made themselves miserable so as to like preserve their sense of like class status. Yes, exactly. Very Protestant. Yeah, yeah.
I think it's fun to center it around leisure. I didn't realize that so few people up until this point had actually taken leisure seriously.
Yeah,
For lack of a better word, like
right.
deeming it worthy of study. So I'm like really looking forward, because I mean we could read the first chapter is great and it sets up like kind of the backdrop, and I could find 1,000 books that talk about this kind of stuff, right? Like who's labor organizing where, blah 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 in the industry. But I'm looking forward to hearing how people celebrated 4th of July or whatever.
Right. Yeah, because it's
getting that whole aspect of people's lives in earlier research just feels like such an oversight.
yeah. And I that was actually, thank you for bringing that up, because that's like one of my first points that I wanted to bring up, but I just blew right past it. But like the yeah, like the introduction opens with him being like, listen, I know you might not take this seriously, but this is serious. Leisure time is serious. It matters. How people had fun matters. And like that's one of the most interesting things about this book, because like, you know, academia is stuffy now. Can you imagine the academia of 1983? Like, yeah, it's like being perceived as unserious, like, oof, you better, you know, seppuku time, right? So I think that like it's kind of neat that this book that challenges like academic pretensions and like what's serious and what isn't used Worcester to do that, because Worcester is a deeply unserious city. It's so perfect, because no matter what kind of good conversation we've had tonight, we do have to remember that Worcester is not a very serious place. It's barely real. So yeah, it's an unserious book club. That's right. Yeah, so I don't know. Is that a place to leave it, or are we feeling good about that? Yeah. All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming out. I am curious to hear if once every 2 weeks or once every month would be better, or once every 2 months, and we'll finish this book in like 2 years. I don't know. We can talk about that later. I can send out an email or whatever. But
as much as I'd love to do every 2 weeks, being realistic, probably
yeah, right.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Every 2 weeks might be a little bit too much of a commitment. I agree.
I would take the time with the.
Yeah. Yeah. So
I agree with this stuff too, so.
yeah, and
Yeah, if we do like a month, then we could do like one section. For each.
yes.
Break it into
The
parts.
next section is like 2 chapters, but it's like 50 pages.
Right. Okay. So that sounds like the best plan is that we do chapter 2 and 3, which is the second section, I think, and pick this up next month sometime. And I'll send out an email and set a date for it. But I think that there was a lot of really nuanced and deep reading of the material and deep conversation. So biting off a bigger chunk of text and meeting like once a month would be cool. I think that would be awesome, and prompt some really cool conversation. So thank you everyone who showed up, and I don't know, that's a wrap on book club meeting number 1. Gonna ask for money one more time. Any donations you can make to the Worcester Community Media Foundation, throw it in this, or there's a link right here to donate online, and all of that money goes towards supporting a truly weird and unserious media foundation run out of a video store.
Very Worcester.
Very Worcester, very Worcester. And to everyone who watched online, I thank you for doing that. I hope you had a good time. I didn't look at this once.
There was some good conversation.
There was? Oh, were you checking it at the same time? Oh, that's cool. Yeah, right.
One of my friends
Oh, thank
was
you.
watching at home and was like,
All right, I'm gonna end this stream. Goodbye, everybody. See you next Tuesday, maybe. Oh yeah. Oh, hold on. Buy a bookmark on the Big Cartel. Become a Rewind Video Club member. Rewind Video. Or just make a one-off donation to the Worcester Community Media Foundation at givebutter.com/rewind video. Every little bit helps us build up something where we can one day, establish a real infrastructure for alternative local journalism. Okay, I think that's all I have to say for now. And still.